I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 21. My fellow Americans, 4th of August, 1990. Oval Office, White House, Washington, D.C. The producer held up 3 fingers. 3, 2, 1, he counted, pointing at the president, who was seated behind the resolute desk. Good evening, my fellow Americans. I come before you tonight to explain a grave situation that has developed in the Middle East. As you know, Iraq sent forces into Kuwait on the 1st of August and overran that tiny nation in one day. We presented a strong case to the Security Council, along with Great Britain, to force the Iraqi army out of Kuwait and re-establish the legitimate government. The Security Council, led by the Soviet Union and China as well as France, refused to condemn this action. The festering argument between Iraq and Kuwait is over the debts Iraq incurred during the Iran-Iraq War and Iraqi insistence that it did not have to pay those debts back. Several nations, to include Saudi Arabia and Egypt, forgave the debt and attempted to present a negotiated peace settlement. But Iraq refused and launched an attack. The brother of the emir was killed in this action, and we extended to His Highness our deepest sympathy. This morning while we slept, Iraq, not satisfied with the results it achieved in Kuwait, launched a surprise attack into Saudi Arabia on 3 fronts with overwhelming forces. In addition, airstrikes have hit most airports and military facilities. It appears that they will quickly overrun the country, resulting in Iraq controlling the majority of the world's oil supply, and that cannot be allowed. Therefore, I have ordered that U.S. naval forces in the region provide support to the Saudi armed forces. In addition, I have placed the 18th Airborne Corps on alert for immediate deployment to the region. It is my sincere hope that Iraq will recognize the sovereign rights of Saudi Arabia and withdraw its forces as quickly as possible. We are asking the nations of the world to join us, if necessary, in forcing Iraq out of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. In the days to follow, you will see our service members from across the country moving to embarkation ports and airfields. It is my sincere hope that their presence in the region will be sufficient to convince the Iraqi forces to return to Iraq without bloodshed. But Iraq must understand that, one way or the other, Iraqi forces will return to Iraqi soil. I ask all of you for your prayers for our service members and their families as we undertake this endeavor. Good night, and God bless. Chapter 22. Air Superiority. 5 August 1990. CENTCOM Headquarters, MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Florida. John, Norm here. What's the situation? General Norman Schwarzkopf asked. Lieutenant General John Yosak was his deputy and commander of the 3rd Army, the ground component of CENTCOM. Yosak and Horner had arrived in Riyadh after an 18-hour flight from MacDill AFB in Tampa. Their plane had done a couple of in-flight refuels. Norm, it isn't good. The Iraqis have punched across the border and are attacking on 3 fronts. One just took the King Khalid military city, and another's driving towards Dhahran. The Iraqi 2nd Corps is heading for Tabuk and meeting little to no opposition. The Iraqis have taken the refinery at Al Jubail intact and the Royal Saudi Navy base just north of there. The Iraqi Air Force hit almost every Saudi airfield pretty hard at dawn, after their commandos took out the Central Air Defense Command and several of the Hawk batteries. There was a slight pause in the report before he continued. There's an armored brigade minus here in Riyadh, but the king is reluctant to move them as they don't know which front offers the greatest threat. Like an armored brigade is going to stop this juggernaut. Either of two fronts could turn towards the capital. I think the king will probably be bugging out for his home in Spain now that the brigade at King Khalid military city has fallen. Right now, he is asking if we could send in jets from the carrier task force to assist. I told him I would have to clear that with the president, and we would need to get an Anglico team with the Saudis to coordinate the strikes. Many of the royals are at the airport getting on their private jets and beating feet out of the country at this point, General Yosak concluded. John, we need to move fast if we're going to do anything. I'm ordering that we execute the force package in Oplan 1288 right away. I've spoken to Powell, and he's in agreement. His staff is cutting the orders now. I've also spoken to Gary Luck at 18th Airborne Corps, and he anticipated this going down and already put his Ready Brigade on alert, so they'll have a wheels up in about 4 hours instead of dead start 18 hours. McCaffrey is ready to move tanks to the port of Savannah. Where should they send them? At this point, and as long as it's going to take to get them here from the States, I cannot say with any certainty. By the time they get here, Dammam and Dahran will have been captured. As for the Ready Brigade of the 82nd, the airfields will probably be overrun except for Prince Sultan Military Airfield, south of Riyadh, and Riyadh International. But they'll be totally isolated shortly if things keep going this poorly. Hell, it would be another Bastogne. I would recommend that we get an MEU to Jeddah on the Red Sea, in case we need to evacuate people, or want to get a force in country and put the 82nd in there to help hold that port. If things get really bad, we can evacuate them, Yosak explained, trying to convey the direness of the situation. Sounds good. Is Horner there with you? Schwarzkopf asked. Yeah. Put him on, Schwarzkopf directed. General Yosak handed the phone to General Horner. He wants to talk to you. Norm, the Saudi Air Force got caught with their pants around their ankles. The early warning command center at Prince Sultan Military Airfield was taken out by commandos before dawn, and just before the airstrikes came in. The one AWACS aircraft the Saudis had in the air was taken out just about the same time. Hawk batteries were hesitant to fire, so they were ineffective because no one knew what was going on. Has the Navy launched any aircraft in support of the Saudi ground forces? Schwarzkopf asked, hopeful that maybe U.S. and Saudi forces were working together to stop this invasion. I don't believe so. They have a problem right now of not knowing who the naval air wings should talk with, and they're unfortunately really lacking any kind of big-picture awareness of what's going on. Honestly, Norm, the Iraqis really did a hell of a job knocking out the Saudis' initial ability to respond to the invasion. The Iraqis are masterfully using this confusion to rush their units all across the country, gobbling up as much of it as they can, as quickly as they can. General Horner audibly sighed for a moment before adding, Right now, Norm, the Iraqis have air superiority over Saudi. The Iraqi Su-25s have been hammering any sort of defense the Saudis even try to organize. At this point, if the Saudis want to retain any control of their country, we need to get the Navy in an air interdiction role, as well as getting fighters out of Incirlik to hit Iraq from the north. To do that, we have to clear it with Turkey to use that base for that purpose. I'll speak with Colin and have him get state on that, explained Schwarzkopf. Well, we can start moving stuff this way. I think we should alert the 71st out of Langley and the 42nd bomb out of Loring, and get them over here quick. We can stage the 42nd out of Diego Garcia, and the 71st I would send to Muscat or someplace in Oman, but not Saudi. Can we get them into Oman or Egypt? Horner asked. You get them moving and I'll get the clearance for someplace over there. I'll call you back in a few hours and let you know where we're moving CENTCOM headquarters, as I'm not going to sit in Tampa and play this from here. Pass on to John that I'm going to order the pre-packaged loads at Diego Garcia to head to the area. You guys think the ports would be overrun before the ships could get there? General Schwarzkopf asked. It's only a 4-day sail. Right now, I'd bet those ports will be in Iraqi hands in 24 hours. There's nothing to stop their advance in the east or the west right now, explained Horner. Okay, well, at least they'll be en route. The Marines at Camp Lejeune have been alerted for deployment along with 18th Airborne Corps, whose Rapid Reaction Force should be arriving soon. Let me get cracking on the other things and I'll call you back in about 4 hours. We should have some decisions by then. With that, General Schwarzkopf turned to his aide, who'd been taking notes, and directed, "Get General Powell on the phone." A few minutes later, Schwarzkopf was connected to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "Colin, I just got off the phone with Yosak and Horner. We're going to need some immediate diplomatic support. My guys on the ground in Saudi are saying things are not only bad, they're going to get a lot worse in the next 48 to 96 hours. Schwarzkopf heard an audible sigh from Powell before he asked, "The situation has gotten that dire that quick then?" "Unfortunately, yes. They're telling me that the Iraqis are attacking on 3 fronts as they roll across the country. By tomorrow they'll have captured Dammam, Dhahran, and the major port and refinery facilities in the Gulf. They're likely looking to capture all the way down to the Omani border in a day or 2. Right now, the only port the Saudis think they'll be able to control in a week's time is Jeddah on the Red Sea. Same with airfields, as the Iraqi Air Force took out most of the Saudi Air Force in a pre-dawn strike. Prince Sultan Military Airfield is operational, as are the international airports at Jeddah and Riyadh, but that's it. Right now I'm looking at putting the Rapid Reaction Force for the 82nd in at Jeddah, as well as an MEU. That will give us a toehold. What I need is a port on the eastern side of the country that won't be overrun in the next 30 days. It's going to take that long to get some heavy forces to the area. What I would like is to see if the Oman government will allow us to use their port facilities and staging areas. The ports can handle offloads, although they're not great, and the terrain between Saudi and there is pretty rugged and not conducive to armor. I don't want to expand this and involve Oman unless we really have to go that route, Colin interrupted. Well, damn it, Colin. You could at least ask Baker to ask them, couldn't you? Horner wants to see if we can land our fighters there in Oman, as well as Turkey, or Egypt if the Turks give him shit. He's looking at bringing the 42nd out of Loring and landing them at Diego Garcia, but the fighters need a base closer, unless you think the Navy with 80-some aircraft can take on the Iraqi Air Force with over 400 fighters, Schwarzkopf pointed out. No, we're going to need to get air assets in the area. I'll talk to Baker about basing in Egypt and Oman, Powell said reluctantly. Thank you. Oh, wait one. We only have 1 carrier with the 5th Fleet in the Arabian Sea. Can we get the Eisenhower out of the Med and reposition to the Red Sea? That would provide some protection to the 82nd boys and MEU. I'll talk to Kelso and get an update on the availability of carriers, Powell said in a resigned voice. Excellent. I'll wait for your call. When Storeman Norman hung up, he had a satisfied smile on his face. Something his aide took notice of and smiled himself. Chapter 23. U.S. Air Force to the fight. 6th of August, 1990. Langley Air Force Base. Newport, Virginia. Captain Willis Tate packed a deployment bag as soon as he heard the Iraqis had crossed into Kuwait. He had a 6th sense about this, or maybe he was a little more intelligent than most about what was going to happen, or maybe he was just hoping he'd have a chance to get into some real aerial dogfighting. Tate was an F-15C fighter pilot, and a damn good one at that. He'd been with the 71st Fighter Squadron for 4 years, and not only did he love the squadron, he also loved the area. Living in Newport, Virginia, with all the area had to offer his family, made this posting a dream come true. As an avid fisherman, he found that the Chesapeake Bay offered every kind of good eating fish a man could seek, not to mention the crabs. When he went to bed, he had the weekend all figured out. He and his wife were going to take the Munchkins out on their 30-foot fishing boat to cruise the gunk holes of the Chesapeake. That was until he heard the phone ringing next to his bed. As he reached for the receiver, his eyes caught sight of the alarm clock. 0300 hours. Damn, this had better be good. Captain Tate here. he said in an obvious sleep voice. "Sir, sorry to wake you, but we have a recall. You have a flight briefing at 500. Oh, and sir, don't expect to be going home afterwards," the voice on the other end said. "Where are we going and for how long?" Tate asked as he rolled out of the bed, knowing full well what the answer was and that it would not be said over the phone. "Can't say, sir. Just told to contact you and provide the information," the man said. "Okay, I'm up. I got it. Thanks." His wife groggily rolled over and asked, "What's going on, Willis?" Being an Air Force fighter pilot's wife, she had gotten used to the early morning recalls the base would initiate from time to time. Turning a light on so he could see her face, he said, "I have to go, hun." Now she sat up, a startled look on her face. They'd talked about what was going on in the Middle East and how one day he might get called to head over there. "This is it, isn't it? That thing you said that might happen?" she said, a bit of fear in her voice and uncertainty spreading across her face. Tate didn't say anything for a moment. It just hit him that this probably really was it. He was about to leave for war, a war he might not come home from. In that moment, he turned and faced her. He placed both hands on her face and kissed her deep and long. Without saying anything more, they made love for what might be the last time. They didn't spend long in bed, but made sure it was a memorable experience before he jumped in the shower while she got a pot of coffee going and readied his thermos. When he walked into the kitchen, he asked, "Do you want to drive me to the ops building or do you want me to leave the car there?" "No, I'll drive you. Let me get the kids up," she said, heading down the hall to wake the little monsters up. "You don't need to wake them. You'll only be gone, 15 minutes?" he said, before taking his first sip of coffee. "Willis, don't be a fool. I'm not leaving the kids here. They'll want to see you. God only knows when you'll be back." As she walked down the hall in her form-fitting jeans, he smirked. "Damn, I'm going to miss that ass." They loaded the kids and his deployment bag into the car and made the short 10-minute drive to flight ops. It seemed that everyone in the squadron had been called, to include pilots and ground personnel. Husbands and wives stood close to each other, exchanging kisses, while young children held daddy's or mommy's leg. Slowly, the folks in uniform all moved into the building, and even more slowly, those left behind began to leave the parking lot. Once everyone was in the squadron briefing room, Lieutenant Colonel Keith Roberts stepped up the podium. He was the squadron commander and had been for a year. Like most lieutenant colonels in the Air Force, he'd caught the end of the Vietnam War and had some combat experience over the skies of Hanoi in those closing days. "All right, listen up. Sorry to drag you out of your beds, but we received a deployment order around midnight. The ground personnel were called in first and have been here readying your planes. Once you guys are airborne, they'll be off themselves to follow behind in some C-141s. This sudden deluge of news caught everyone by surprise, especially with how fast things were happening. Once Lieutenant Colonel Roberts had gotten everyone to quiet down again, he continued. You all know the Iraqi forces crossed into Saudi Arabia 2 days ago. Apparently they're gobbling up the country a hell of a lot faster than the brass at the Pentagon thought possible. They also hit every Saudi airfield ahead of the ground attack and appear to have destroyed most of the Saudi Air Force before it had a chance to get off the ground or even relocate to an airfield further away from the fighting. Right now, it appears the only operational airfields are Prince Sultan Air Base near Riyadh, though it was hit pretty hard during the opening day of the war, and a couple of air bases around Jeddah and Medina. The runways for the bases in and around the Jeddah and Medina area are intact from what we've been told, but the Prince Sultan Air Base only has one operational runway until the others can be patched up. This means we're going to be flying into some airfields that are currently under enemy air attack, so we'll need to be flexible on where we land. Roberts paused for a moment to let that sink in. This will be a deployment to Mildenhall with Enron 8, and then a continuation to the Middle East. Moans and groans could be heard from the pilots. We'll launch at 0700 this morning, with 24 aircraft departing in groups of 4 in 1-hour intervals. Until you launch, you will remain here, and there will be no outside phone calls. I'll be flight leader for the first flight. Major Goodall will be flight leader for the last flight. He'll assign flight leader positions later. If there are no questions, Major Goodall will give the mission brief, Colonel Roberts said, and stepped down. Major Goodall, the squadron operations officer, outlined the flight to include headings, altitude, frequencies, and refuel points where they'd rendezvous with tanker aircraft from the 91st Aerial Refueling Squadron. Each fighter would need in-flight refueling to make the hop across the Atlantic. Everyone prayed for a tailwind, as they all knew it was going to be a long flight sitting in the single-seat aircraft. A few had stuffed a paperback book in their flight suit to read along the way as the aircraft flew on autopilot. Anything to stay awake and keep the mind engaged. Captain Tate, Iron 1-2, sat in his aircraft with the engine at flight idle and the canopy open. He was number 2 in the first flight, flying with Lieutenant Colonel Roberts's wing. He was waiting for the other 2 aircraft to notify the flight leader they were ready. Iron 1-1, Iron 1-3, I'm up. Roger, Colonel Roberts, Iron 1-1, replied. Iron 1-1, Iron 1-4, all systems up. Iron 1-4 had applied for astronaut training and was attempting to add some humor to the flight. Roger, Iron 1-2, get us clearance for the runway. Roger, Iron 1-1, Captain Tate replied excitedly. Langley Ground Control, Iron 1-2, flight of 4 for the active. Iron 1-2, Roger. You are cleared from present location and proceed to runway 26. Contact Langley Tower on 2366, over. Roger, Langley Ground Control. Colonel Roberts had monitored the conversation and began taxiing his aircraft after exchanging a salute with the crew chief, who would fly over the Anna C-141 aircraft with the rest of the maintenance crews of the squadron. As the aircraft taxied forward, following the leader, each lowered his canopy and made sure the air conditioners were working and positioned themselves just short of the runway. Langley Tower, Iron 1-2, flight of 4 for takeoff. Iron 1-2, you are cleared to take the active and hold while I get your clearance from Norfolk departure. Roger, Langley Tower, Iron 1-2, flight of 4 holding. As the 4 aircraft rolled out and looked down the 11,000-foot runway, they assumed a staggered formation with flight leader in the front and Captain Tate behind and off his right wing. Iron 1-3 was lined up behind the flight leader, with Iron 1-4 behind and off his right wing. Iron 1-2, Langley Tower. Langley Tower, go ahead. Iron 1-2, you are clear for departure. Contact Norfolk Departure Control on climb out on 273. Good hunting. Langley Tower out. Langley Tower knows where they're going. Can't keep a secret long on this base, Colonel Roberts thought as he pushed forward on his throttles. Iron 1-2 flight of 4 is on the go. And with that, the 4 F-15C fighters departed down the runway with a 15-second interval between the first 2 aircraft and the next 2. The scene would be replayed 5 more times that day, the largest air campaign since the beginning of the Vietnam War. At Loring Air Force Base, pilots with the 42nd Bombardment Wing had been called into the squadron briefing room. Those crews that flew the nuclear-capable bombers were used to spending 7 days in the Ready Alert building and being called out at all times of the day or night. They were used to these unannounced exercises, especially as they were assigned to Strategic Air Command, or SAC, who routinely ran a lot of alert drills. The 42nd was the only squadron with all its B-52G bombers being conventional bombers not capable of using nuclear weapons, as agreed upon in the SALT II treaty talks. Therefore, they seldom had a no-notice exercise. Generally, the wives would know of a planned no-notice exercise before their husbands did. They had all gotten the phone call at 100 hours and were told to be seated by 300 hours. Colonel Doug McClure came to the front, and everyone quieted down. Colonel McClure was an academy graduate and had been in B-52s his entire career. He had flown nuclear-armed planes as well as the G model that was modified for conventional bombs only. He had cut his teeth flying in Operation Linebacker over North Vietnam in the late 1960s. He knew what it was like to watch a B-52 being hit by a surface-to-air missile. He also knew that the chance of getting out of the crippled plane was small. The situation is this. Iraqi forces that crossed over into Saudi Arabia are driving on two fronts towards the port of Dhahran and the capital of Riyadh, Colonel McClure said. This previously unknown news had caused a few surprised looks on the faces of the pilots and confirmed some murmurs they had been hearing. The Saudi government has officially requested our assistance, and the president has obliged. We've been assigned to the 7th Air Division out of Diego Garcia as part of AFCENT. General Horner is commanding AFCENT and is currently in Riyadh. Again, there were murmurs and looks exchanged, some smiling, some not so happy. Gentlemen, you will depart here and fly non-stop to Diego Garcia. It's a 20-hour flight. We'll be getting some in-flight refueling along the way. Refuelers will be coming out of Clark Air Base and Diego Garcia, as well as from here, and will join you in Diego Garcia. The crews were used to long flights as part of SAC. Each of your aircraft departs here with a full load of 750-pound bombs. We will depart starting today and have the entire wing deployed in 72 hours. Aircraft and crew assignments are posted on the board. I'll be flight leader on the first flight departing today. Flight operations has your flight plans for each flight, to include routes, altitude, and planned refuel points. Any questions? The operations officer asked. One of the junior pilots poked his hand up. Sir, why are we leaving with full bomb loads? If we load up in Diego Garcia, we won't need so many in-flight refueling points. Did you ever consider, Captain, that you may be making a bomb run en route to Diego Garcia? This is a fluid situation right now, so be prepared if you get a change of mission and route change in flight. It still hadn't registered with some that they were going to war. The colonel's last statement quickly snapped them out of that momentary fog. The sky was clear, and turbulence was being felt. Perfect day for a cornet across the ocean. The 91st Aerial Refueling Tanker had pre-positioned to Gander to meet a flight of 4 F-15 fighters as they came up the eastern seaboard en route to Mildenhall, England, for an overnight stop prior to leaving for their final destination in the Middle East. Captain Kyle Hadel had flown the route several times and was also a maintenance officer for the KC-135. Lieutenant Thibaut Moore was flying left seat with him on this trip. Moore was fresh out of flight school and transition training in the KC-135. This was his first operational mission. Master Sergeant Lamar Daniel was the boom operator and busy filling out the mound of paperwork required at the beginning of each trip. Weight and balance tables, flight logs, and maintenance logs all had to be up to date, and that fell on Daniel's shoulders, as there was no flight engineer on the KC-135. Daniel had joined the Air Force right out of high school and had been a boom operator for the past 15 years. He loved his job. At the rate he was going, he would be able to retire from the Air Force after 20 years of service and still only be 38 years old, still young enough to pursue another career and have a nice retirement check from Uncle Sam. Not enough to live on, but enough to make life comfortable with another job. Once in flight, Captain Hadel would start shifting fuel to meet the requirements of the fuel plan for the respective fighters they would be meeting. Once the refueling process began, the pilots would be responsible for transferring the fuel. Daniel would be responsible for flying the boom. The flight was as expected, almost boring. Captain Tate sat in the cockpit of his F-15 fighter with the autopilot on, reading a book about helicopter pilots in Vietnam. Undaunted valor An assault helicopter unit in Vietnam had been making the rounds in the squadron, and now it was about to make the rounds in the Middle East. Everyone in the Iron Man flight was on autopilot. These fighter pilots were used to short flights. They weren't the ferry pilots that typically made the over-big water flights to deliver an aircraft to some distant airfield. The seats were comfortable for short flights, but for 7-hour flights, even a lazy boy would be uncomfortable. Tate was just thankful he hadn't filled up on coffee before takeoff, as there was no relief tube in the F-15, and meals consisted of a candy bar that one could pull out of one's pocket. When they'd first departed, the usual banter between aircraft had taken place, but things had quieted down for the past 4 hours. The only excitement was about to unfold as they were approaching a rendezvous point with a KC-135 flying gas station out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. The KC-135 from the 91st Air Refueling Squadron was on station and just waiting for them to drain their fuel bladders, which contained 202,800 pounds of JP-5 fuel. Each F-15 would take up to 5,000 gallons of fuel if need be. The 91st was part of the 6th Wing, which had 3 refueling squadrons, the 91st and 50th Air Refueling Squadrons, and the 99th Air National Guard Squadron out of Sumter Smith Air National Guard Base, Alabama. The crews had been briefed earlier and were launched long before the fighters departed, so they could be in position to meet the fighters as they made their way across the ocean to England. "Flight, Iron Man 1-1 over," Lieutenant Colonel Roberts radioed on the UHF radio. That got everyone's attention. "Iron Man 1-2, up. Iron Man 1-3, over. Iron Man 1-4 has you loud and clear. Flight, we should be seeing the flying gas station soon. I have him on radar. I suspect we all have the same fuel status. Anyone low and needs to go first?" Iron Man 1-1 asked. 1-2 is good. 1-3 good. Mission control, 1-4 is A-OK. Roger, let's step up in chalk order, Lieutenant Colonel Roberts instructed as he commenced to contact the flying gas station. Bolt 1-5, Iron Man 1-1 over, Lieutenant Colonel Roberts transmitted, attempting to contact the KC-135 from the 91st Aerial Refueling Squadron. Iron Man 1-1, Bolt 1-5 over, Captain Kyle Hadel, pilot of the KC-135, transmitted after a brief pause. Bolt 1-5, Iron Man is a flight of 4 looking to fill up, over. Roger, Iron Man 1-1, we've been expecting you. We are at Angels 240 and airspeed of 350, altimeter setting 2995 over, Bolt 1-5 reported. Roger, 240 at 350, 2995. We should be ready in about 30 minutes. Order for refuel will be 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, and 1-4. Roger, Iron Man 1-1, we are standing by, Bolt 1-5 transmitted, then switched frequencies. Newfoundland Center, Bolt 1-5, Marsa, over. Roger, Bolt 1-5, understand Marsa, Newfoundland Center responded, acknowledging that Bolt 1-5 would now take responsibility for aircraft separation with the cluster of jets around his aircraft that Newfoundland Center was seeing on their radar screen. Captain Hadel was familiar with the 71st, as it was his first assignment on graduating from flight school and the maintenance officer's course. After 4 years, he'd switched over to flying the KC-135. He had been in the Air Force for the past 8 years. As the Iron Man flight of 4 approached Bolt 1-5, 2 aircraft came up and stood off the right wing and 2 off the left wing, creating a large V formation if observed from the ground. Daniel, visual, Hadel reported, indicating that he saw the F-15s forming up on them. Daniel now knew he would be talking to the fighters for the remainder of the refueling operation. Bolt 1-5, order of refuel will be Iron Man 1-1, followed by 1-2, 1-3, and 1-4. How copy? Iron Man 1-1 transmitted. Roger, good copy, Daniel said. 1-1 approached from behind and slightly below. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts could look up and see the boom operator, Master Sergeant Daniel, peering down at him from the boom pit. A door with a small window covered a much larger fixed window in the boom pit, through which the operator could observe the fighters below and behind. Once the door was raised, the boom pit operator was provided a panoramic view of the Earth passing behind them. Slowly, the boom started to lower from behind the KC-135, like the stinger of some giant insect. Daniel controlled the lowering and extending of the boom with his left hand on 2 levers. In front of him, the console showed him the elevation of the boom, and he strove to maintain that elevation at between 20 and 50 degrees. Another instrument showed him how many feet out the fuel probe was extended or telescoped, and he wanted to keep that at less than 18 feet. Once the boom was lowered, it slowly began to extend. Under the telescoping gauge were 3 lights that Daniel monitored, the signal system status. The first was a ready light indicating the system was armed and ready to receive an aircraft. Second was a green light indicating that the fighter was connected to the fuel probe, and lastly, a red light indicating the probe was disconnected. Daniel controlled the movement of the boom with his right hand on a control stick similar to the flight control stick of the fighter. On the console, he had an azimuth indicator that showed him whether the boom was centered on the aircraft or was drifting off to the side and outside the boom envelope. Daniel would fly the boom through that control stick to the fuel intake, maintaining the boom in the refueling envelope. Roberts focused on the boom and the yellow strip down the belly of the KC-135, indicating he was lined up with the center line of the refueler. Roberts had to maneuver his aircraft in the envelope of the boom in order for it to connect with his fuel port. In the cockpit of the KC-135, Hadel dialed in 30,000 pounds of fuel to be sent to Iron Man 1-1. Master Sergeant Daniel was lying on his stomach with his head resting on the neck support, watching Iron Man 1-1 approach. At the appropriate time, Daniel would call out the distance of the jet to the end of the boom. 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet, reaching, contact. A green light lit up on Daniel's console to show that the boom was securely attached to the hungry jet. Heidel had a similar light, and immediately 30,000 pounds of jet fuel began flowing at a rate of 2,000 pounds a minute into the jet fighter. "Daniel, coming up on complete," Heidel indicated as he controlled the fuel flow in accordance with the fuel plan. "Offload complete," Heidel said. "Roger." "Iron Man 1-1, fuel complete, disconnect." "Roger, disconnect," Iron Man 1-1 transmitted, and as the boom was extracted, he throttled back and began to descend. The red light on Daniel's console indicated that the boom was disconnected from the fighter. As he pulled away and took up a position off the wing, Iron Man 1-2 moved into position and completed the same process. Once all the fighters were refueled, they resumed their positions off Bolt 1-5's wings and tagged along until the next time they needed to take on more fuel. A boring hour passed, and then Bolt 1-4 transmitted, "Hey, Bolt 1-5! Bolt 1-5 here, go ahead. Bolt 1-5, watch this." And Bolt 1-4 executed a barrel roll, stopping upside down and maintaining his position. Finally, he rolled back upright. "How was that, Bolt 1-5? Daniel had been watching this demonstration of flying ability. 1-4, that was pretty awesome, but I can do some pretty amazing stuff too, Daniel said. "Oh yeah? Show me," Iron Man 1-4 responded. "Okay, here goes," Daniel said. Iron Man 1-4 waited in great anticipation for this demonstration, and he waited. "Hey, Iron Man 1-4, did you see that?" "No, Bolt 1-5, I didn't see anything. What did you do?" "Oh, I got up and went to the bathroom, and then made a sandwich and got a cup of coffee. Pretty amazing, and I bet you can't do that," Daniel transmitted. The other Iron Man aircraft knew what was coming at Iron Man 1-4's expense and could be heard laughing over the radio. Iron Man 1-4 wasn't heard from until the next refueling point. Chapter 24. Readjust. 6th August 1990. CENTCOM Headquarters. MacDill Air Force Base. Tampa, Florida. "Norm, John here," came the gruff voice from across the globe. "John, what's the situation like there? My staff is briefing that the Iraqis are moving across the north like shit through a goose," General Schwarzkopf exclaimed in an urgent tone. "They're not far off the mark, Norm. It's official. We got word the King Khalid military city surrendered without a fight. What's killing me is it took nearly 2 days to finally get confirmation of that. God only knows where that Iraqi division that took him out is right now. As if that wasn't bad enough, the refinery at Al Jubail was seized intact, as was the Navy base, and the Ras Tanura oil terminal. King Fahd military airfield has been seized, and most of the other airfields have been badly damaged. The Saudi Air Force at this point doesn't exist. It was either destroyed on the ground, or the remnants of it have flown across the country to bases along the Red Sea. General Schwarzkopf could hear John pause, long enough to catch his breath. Then he continued, "The Iraqi attack is a juggernaut at this point, and there's nothing really left to stop it. They've got a brigade of M60A1 tanks here in Riyadh, and from the sounds of things, they're staying here to defend the city. There's some talk they may also push them out to support a battalion to the north in the vicinity of Buraydah. They've got a battalion of light infantry from the Saudi National Guard trying to prepare a last-ditch defense of the capital." "Jesus, John. It sounds like the Saudi military has completely fallen apart. I don't want you stuck in Riyadh if it's going to be overrun. State has talked to the Sultan of Oman, and he's offered for us to establish a headquarters there and begin stationing fighter aircraft and ground forces in his country. I'm sending a plane to get you and Horner out of there and into Muscat to set up the headquarters. Our advance party will be airborne in about 6 hours to meet you there and set up shop. The Brigade Rapid Reaction Force from the 82nd is en route. The big question I need answered right now is, where do you think we should put them?" questioned General Schwarzkopf. "Jeddah. It's 400 miles from Riyadh, with some really nasty rugged terrain between there and here. Good infantry country. It won't be easy to move a mechanized armor force through there. We have an MEU securing the airport. They've got solid air cover from the carrier until we can get more units brought over. That's my recommendation, sir. Have them link up with the Marines." Jokingly, Schwarzkopf asked, "Do you think Marines and soldiers together will get along long enough to fight Iraqis and not each other?" Yusuk laughed over the phone. "Oh, there'll be a few bloody noses, I'm sure, but they'll come together when the Iraqis show up." "Okay, we'll notify Marsent that the 82nd is coming and is under their control until the division is established ashore. Then the MEU will fall under the 82nd's control until we move them back aboard. We'll likely see about moving a battle group to the Red Sea, but it'll be a while as both are in port right now on the East Coast. I understand the Eisenhower will be replaced shortly by the Saratoga," Schwarzkopf explained. "What do we do about the 24th ID? You know they have a Rapid Reaction Force Company team ready to deploy. McCaffrey is chomping at the bit and has already rolled some stock to the port. No ships are there yet, but he and his equipment are," General Yosok offered. "At this point, the best I could recommend is fly the Rapid Reaction Force team into Jeddah to reinforce the 82nd. The 82nd has no tanks or heavy combat vehicles except the Sheridans, and we can only fly a couple of those in at a time. The 24th Rapid Reaction Force is only a company team, but it may be able to help out." "Where do we send McCaffrey?" Schwarzkopf asked. "Where I would like to send him, and where we need to send him, are 2 different places," Yosuk said sarcastically. "Look, he won't arrive here for at least 2, probably 3 weeks. We can let this situation work itself out and decide then where it would be best to land the 24th. Those ships have got to cross the Atlantic, come through the Med and refuel, then go through the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea. We have time to make that decision." "What's the situation in Riyadh?" The king is leaving in the next couple of hours for his home in Spain. Most of the royals have already left as well. Those in the military are talking to the Sultan of Oman about setting up a government in exile and a command headquarters there. We should get state to support that position with the Sultan. All right, I'll get that 82nd Brigade diverted to Jeddah along with the rest of the division. Also, where do you recommend we put in the 101st? Send the 101st to Jeddah. Their attack helicopters will have a field day if the Iraqis attempt to move against Jeddah, and their attack helicopters should be the first to arrive. Oh, if McCaffrey is adamant about knowing where he's going, then tell him Muscat. We can start to build a heavy force around him there. If we have to send him elsewhere, we can change that at sea. Don't bring his people over until we say the word. A heavy force won't do much good in the Jeddah area. It's just too mountainous for an armored force to effectively navigate and fight through. If the Iraqis attempt it themselves, they'll learn a hard lesson. But I don't want our guys to have to learn the hard way. Oh, one other question. Where is the pre-positioned equipment out of Diego Garcia going? It was supposed to go to Dahran, but now we're thinking Muscat. That would be my vote. Truthfully, Norm, outside of Jeddah, I think Saudi is a write-off. Here, Horner wants to talk to you. Norm, how you doing? General Horner asked once he was on the phone. I suspect a lot better than you are right now. What's the air situation? Not good. The Iraqis are coordinating their air caps and close air support missions and integrating the close air into the ground maneuver plan really well. This is a vast improvement from what we were seeing in the Iran-Iraq war. They learned some lessons, but I think there's something else at play right now, General Horner said cautiously. Schwarzkopf lifted an eyebrow at that last remark. Not that they could see or tell that he had. Still, he wasn't sure what his air chief meant. Why don't you break it down for me, Chuck? There was a short pause on the line before General Horner spoke. I'm sure you're aware the Iraqi Air Force has been sporting some new Russian-made aircraft. Some of it's stuff we haven't seen them fly, or at least not fly a lot of. I don't have anything official or anything, but these pilots seem to be a lot better than the Iraqi pilots we're used to seeing. I'm not saying these new aircraft are being flown by Russians, but it sure would make sense considering the level of skill and coordination they're displaying. It should also be noted the Russians have apparently lent or leased them some pretty high-end air defense systems. Weapon systems designed to provide a fast, mobile armored group with some pretty damn good protection against aircraft and helicopters. We're also seeing surges in different types of attacks. For instance, during 2 of the air raids, the Iraqis made heavy use of their blinder and backfire bombers. They really decimated the Saudi Air Force on the opening night of the war with their bomber squadrons and Su-25 frog-footers. In the first wave alone, they took out all 5 of the Saudi airfields with dumb bombs and took out the aircraft with what appeared to be a copycat of our CBU-72 bombs. The overpressure was destroying aircraft, and the lack of oxygen and overpressure killed a lot of ground personnel and pilots attempting to take off. These were well-organized, well-coordinated attacks. We're going to need to really think about where we place our aircraft. Saudi is out, so that really only leaves us with Oman, and possibly Egypt, and Incirlik, if the Turks will play along. Schwarzkopf sat back in his chair with the phone receiver still pressed against the side of his head. I'm going to need to get with General Powell and find out what the heck is going on with the Iraqi Air Force. Maybe Chuck is right about Russian pilots flying for them. In either case, we need to get the air situation sorted so the aircraft en route know where to go. Schwarzkopf concluded, Okay, Chuck, we'll get state going on this. Oman is the best bet at this point, or Turkey, but we'll see if state can work out something with Egypt. Tell John that there's a plane en route to get you guys out as well as the embassy staff. We'll meet you in Muscat shortly. Now get out of there. That's an order. Yes, sir. Chapter 25. Continue the attack. 6th August 1990. 2nd Iraqi Corps. King Khalid Military City, Saudi Arabia. General al-Hamdani was rather pleased about staying in the set of quarters that had been graciously made available to him in King Khalid Military City. So nice of the Saudi commander to have provided these accommodations for me, he thought privately as he chuckled. Like he had a choice. After the complex had been seized, a surrender had been negotiated with the Saudi commander. He was smart enough to realize that resistance against 2 full divisions with air support would be futile. That night, General al-Hamdani got a good night's sleep, as did his entire force. As he walked into the conference room, his division commanders looked equally refreshed. Also present was the commander of the Ivy Army Corps, which was the follow-on force to the 2nd Republican Guard Corps. Lieutenant General Aryan bin Khalif was a fairly new corps commander, having commanded the 16th Infantry Division in the early days of the Iran-Iraq War. He had been wounded in an airstrike while he led his division from the front. The IV Corps had followed the 2nd Republican Guard Corps and now sat north of King Khalid Military City at Hafar al-Batin. When al-Hamdani walked into the briefing room, he spotted his old friend. "Aryan, it's good to see you." Republican Guard commanders always considered themselves a bit superior to regular army officers of equivalent rank. Still, al-Hamdani knew he needed the regular army units if his Republican Guard units were going to be successful in the coming days. Aryan bin Khalif smiled. "Likewise, General," he responded pleasantly but coolly. His lukewarm response did not go unnoticed among the junior officers present. Al-Hamdani moved to the head of the table, where a map was spread out for them to look at. Picking up a pointer, he began to explain the purpose of the meeting. "Well, let's begin. We have a lot to cover. Currently, the 1st Republican Guard Corps is moving to cut off Dhahran from Riyadh. They have taken the refinery at Al-Jubail and the oil shipping terminal at Ras Tanura, and they have isolated Dammam. The 45th Infantry Division is occupying Al-Jubail, and the 49th Infantry Division is moving into Dammam. The 8th Mechanized Brigade of the 1st Hammurabi Division took control of the King Fahd Military Airport, and our Air Force has already moved elements there. They will commence operations, providing us with close air support and attack helicopter operations tomorrow." Al-Hamdani paused for just a moment to survey the facial expressions of the generals he was briefing. He then resumed, "Aside from token resistance at King Fahd Military Airport and some Marines in the Al-Jubail area, they have met no significant resistance. They would have moved faster had the roads not been clogged with people fleeing the area. We have captured the brigade minus the Saudi tanks and infantry here. The brigade at Tabuk is still in garrison according to our reconnaissance elements, and the brigade north of Yemen has not moved either. It may be the case that they have not been alerted as their communications are being jammed, or maybe they have lost faith in the king and decided to sit this war out." Several of the officers laughed at his last comment. The Saudi Air Force was swept from the skies during the first few hours of the war. Most of their aircraft were destroyed on the ground at one of their 5 airfields. The few aircraft and helicopters not destroyed managed to disperse to some isolated airfields. I doubt they'll be a problem for us, and if they are, the Air Force will hunt them down. We are also getting reports that an American cargo aircraft was seen landing at the Riyadh International Airport and the Prince Sultan Military Airfield. Our eyes in Riyadh tell us the aircraft has probably been sent in to retrieve the American embassy staff and their families and anyone else who needed to be evacuated. We are under strict orders to avoid contact with the Americans for as long as possible. We do not want to give them an excuse to join this fight, especially since it is reported in the news that they told Saddam that this was an Arab-to-Arab conflict, and they had no interest in being involved. "So where does that leave us?" he asked, pausing long enough to take a sip of his tea, which he had not touched. When no one spoke up, he continued, "It means we continue our attack. At 1800 hours tonight, we move to seize the crossroads in the vicinity of Al-Artawiya here, 160 kilometers to the south. Here we will control the highways to Medina, Jeddah, and Riyadh. The 7th Mechanized, Al-Hamdani looked at Major General Al-Karawi, will attack to seize the town of Buraida, which will protect the right flank and control the road to Medina. General Al-Kab nodded in acknowledgement. The 5th Division, Al-Hamdani continued, looking at Major General Al-Kab, will attack and seize the town of Al-Majma'a. Once you seize it, do not proceed any further south than Jalajil. Block the road to Riyadh, allowing no refugees to come north. Do you understand? I do not want our roads clogged with refugees. If they want to flee, they can go south out of Riyadh to Abha on the Red Sea and into Yemen. Understood, General, Al-Kab responded. General Al-Hamdani turned to General bin Khan. I would like your corps to come as far as Al-Artawiya and stop. You may be just lucky enough to win the prize of taking Riyadh, General, he said with a sneer. Bin Khan knew that there was no way the Republican Guard was going to allow that to happen. First, they wanted the honor, and second, it was too easy a target even if the Americans were still evacuating from the airport. He knew full well that if things got tough, his corps would be tossed into the breach as cannon fodder. Thank you, General. It would be a great honor for the Iraq army to seize the Saudi palace. General Al-Hamdani only smiled at the subtle reference to the army as opposed to the Republican Guard. Looking back at the map, he continued, once we have secured these objectives, then Baghdad is going to have to make some decisions. First Corps has been told to push on to isolate the UAE and close in on the Saudi-Omani border. That means someone is going to have to take Riyadh, Medina, Jeddah, and Mecca, as well as block the Saudi brigade at Abha. That brigade could cut up north along the coast against us. It could strike out northeast to flank the First Corps or make an attempt to retake Riyadh. If I'm to predict what Baghdad will do, I'd guess the mission to take Riyadh will fall to either IV Corps or Knights Corps. Both of these corps are following Second Corps and First Corps respectfully, and with 3 armored divisions and an infantry division not committed yet, they'd be in a better position to nab Riyadh quickly. On the other hand, here he looked at General bin Khan, you have 6 infantry divisions, a mech division, and an armored division, all uncommitted. However, I feel that if we are to move to Medina and Jeddah, I am going to need your infantry divisions as the terrain is not very forgiving to armor forces. Therefore, I would recommend you be prepared to head to Riyadh. General bin Khan saw how his command was being whittled down to the point where he'd be left to capture and babysit the Saudi capital, while the rest of the army trudged onward to greater glory. The general was suddenly aware of the other generals and colonels staring at him, as if waiting for him to say something. He said the only thing he knew was safe to say. Whatever Saddam orders, I will execute, General bin Khan replied with a sarcastic smile. General Al-Hamdani then turned to General Al-Karawi. You, my friend, have a fine highway to follow, but I do not want your track vehicles on that road. Only wheeled vehicles are to use the highway. Is that understood? Paved roads are hard to come by, and we need to keep them in good order for our follow-on supply forces. Some of the generals grumbled at the order, which meant that their units were going to have to travel a lot more slowly across less than desirable terrain. But ultimately, they knew he was right, and that this was a good call. Al-Hamdani added, I know this is going to have your lead elements moving slower across this wasteland, but that is fine as it is the same ground as Al-Kab will be traveling over. Our progress will not be as fast as before, but it does not need to be. This portion should be a drive in the country, as an American would say. Nothing more. Looking over at General Al-Kab, Al-Hamdani clarified, You will also find a paved road along your route. It's only 2 lanes, but the same rule applies. Keep your track vehicles off it. Understood? Yes, sir, Al-Kab replied. Al-Hamdani didn't need to remind General bin Khan about this, as all his vehicles were wheeled vehicles except for some tanks, which were not the modern T-72s, and were all loaded on the heavy equipment transporters, HETs, which were wheeled vehicles. "Are there any questions before I dismiss you all?" the general asked as he looked around the room. Not seeing any, he moved on. "The order of march is that 7th Division will be followed by 5th Division's combat elements. Leave your supply elements behind until we reach our objectives. I want the 7th to push out a reconnaissance element no later than 0400 to report on the road conditions, terrain, and enemy disposition. They are not to become decisively engaged. Understood?"
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.